Okay, hello, my friends. My name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide you context in the war in Ukraine. We are now at 1,000 days since the war began. 1,000 days. And the Ukrainians just got permission yesterday to use American-made rockets, missiles, that kind of thing, to strike inside Russia. But what does that mean? We're going to read the fine print and kind of see what exactly that means, because I don't think it means what we thought it meant. Okay, so here I talked about this yesterday in three big stories, and I talked about it in about breaking news about how Biden was approving weapons. Okay, France and UK also approved expanded use of long-range missiles by Ukraine, including Scalp and Storm Shadow missiles. Now, Biden's approval yesterday and this are marked shifts in Western policy. They truly are, but they're limited. And we need to talk about exactly how limited they are. Now, first, before we do that, the Biden administration's decision to allow Ukraine to use U.S.-provided weapons to strike targets deeper inside Russian territory reverses a policy decision that never should have happened. It never should have been taken, says Kurt Volker. He's a distinguished fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis. We are on day 1,000, and the Ukrainians have just been authorized to fight with U.S. technology, missiles, that sort of thing, inside Russia. It's been one-sided for 1,000. So Putin essentially has deterred the U.S. for 1,000 days. And you wonder why he's thinking, sure, yeah, everything's going my way. We're going to make peace negotiations on our terms. Okay, that's why. So this list here, the long-range weapons, this was a Russian list to show like how far each weapon could go. But this is irrelevant, because if you can only use it in certain areas, or this is irrelevant, where here are military bases within range of ATACMS, but they're only limited to using certain places. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Now, this makes sense of why Zelensky was somewhat cryptic yesterday. Zelensky neither confirms nor denies media reports on an approval for strikes inside Russia with ATACMS and Storm Shadow. He said such matters speak for themselves through actions, not words. Okay, now I thought yesterday that he meant, well, you'll see what happens when we hit them. That's, I don't think, what he said. How far you're actually allowed to strike is, I think, what's going on. Now, Biden has approved the use of long-range American missiles only in the Kursk region. If you look at the fine print, that's what's being said, only in the Kursk region, specifically targeting North Korean forces, according to Axios. President Biden approved Ukraine long-range missiles to fire against Russian and North Korean forces in the Kursk region. So what does that mean? It's like, so the analogy that I gave this morning when I was on UATV was, it's like this. A parent has said since August, you know what, we don't have the money. We're not doing Christmas presents this year. We're not doing Christmas presents this year. We're not doing Christmas this year. We're not doing Christmas this year. We'll still try to eat, but we're not going to have presents this year. And saying that through August, September, October, November, December comes along. And guess what? Hey, we're going to have Christmas presents this year. And then it turns out to be socks. Right? You'd be disappointed too, just like this little guy is, right? Socks for Christmas, that's pretty terrible, right? That's kind of what's going on here. Okay, so Biden authorizes Ukraine to use long-range weapons in Russia. But look at all the times Kursk is mentioned, and this is the key, Kursk. The weapons are intended to be used primarily in Kursk for now, a U.S. official said. With huge troop amassment there, Russia is trying to take Kursk off the table as a potential bargaining chip for the Ukrainians in any future peace talks, something that the U.S. does not want to see. The idea is to help Ukraine hold on to Kursk for as long as possible, the official said. Here's Kursk again, and like that's it. That's the plan. Okay, this is the New York Times, and I know that you can't quite see it. I can see it on my screen, but I want to read you some little bits from it. This is just generating it through my library system. With 2 months left, the president, for the first time, authorized Ukrainian military to use the system known as ATACMS to help defend forces in the Kursk region of Russia. President Biden has authorized the first use of U.S.-supplied long-range missiles by Ukraine for strikes inside Russia, U.S. officials said. The weapons are likely to be initially employed against Russia and North Korean troops in defense of the Ukrainian forces in Kursk region of Western Russia, the official said. Now, but it said it was written that first employed there, but that didn't mean, but it seems to mean only employed there, from what I'm reading elsewhere. The official said that while the Ukrainians were likely to use the missiles first against Russia and North Korean troops that threaten Ukrainian forces in Kursk, Mr. Biden could authorize them to use the weapons elsewhere. Could, but that doesn't mean that he will. Okay, the Ukrainians could use ATACMS missiles to strike Russia and North Korean troop concentrations, key places of military equipment, logistics nodes, ammunition depots, supply lines deep in Russia. But again, that doesn't mean that he's going to allow that in any. We know that they're going to be allowed to use it in a limited scale in Kursk. We don't know about anything else. The British and French militaries have given the Ukrainians a limited number of Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles, which have a range of about 155 miles, less than the American missile system. While British and French leaders voiced support for Mr. Zelensky's request, they were reluctant to allow Ukrainians to start using their missiles on Russian soil unless Mr. Biden agreed to allow the Ukrainians to do the same with ATACMS. On Sunday, some Republican lawmakers praised the move, but others said it come too late. Quote, "For months, I'd been calling on President Biden to remove these restrictions." This is Republican Representative Michael Turner of Ohio, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, said in a statement, quote, "President Biden should have listened to President Zelensky much earlier." Yeah. He should have listened to him much earlier. Officials said Mr. Biden was persuaded to make the change in part by the sheer audacity of Russia's decision to throw North Korean troops at Ukrainian lines. He was also swayed, they said, by concerns that Russian assault force would be able to overwhelm Ukrainian troops in Kursk if they were not allowed to defend themselves with long-range weapons. But that's not going to do anything for the kind of blitz that we saw yesterday, where they had 100 some odd missiles and another 50 drones and that sort of thing. It's not going to do anything for that. It won't make a dent. But they said Mr. Biden determined that the potential benefits Ukraine will be able to reach certain high-value targets that it would not otherwise be able to, and the United States will be able to send a message to North Korea that it will pay a significant price for its involvement, outweighed the escalation risks. I don't think they're paying a significant price by being able to hit within this one small area in Kursk. Like, this is Kursk. This is the section that is in question in all of Russia. Russia spans 11 time zones, and that's what we're talking about. This is a picture of Kursk, 18 November. The white space is here, and here are areas that Ukraine controlled, but Russia has taken back. The lighter colors are kind of a gray zone, and the yellow is what is occupied by Ukraine. So they're losing some ground, it seems, and yeah, it's bad, but that's it. Okay, now let's look at Russian media reaction to President Biden allowing this to happen, because they were going kind of nuts about the news, just like there were people on the Ukrainian side that were rejoicing in it.
The news that Joe Biden has given the green light for Ukraine to use long-range missiles supplied by the US to strike Russia came too late for most of this morning's Russian papers. But the ultra-pro-Kremlin Izvestia has the story and asks, what might US permission to strike inside Russia change? The paper repeats President Putin's previous warning that the use of Western long-range weapons against Russian territory would signify the participation of NATO countries in the conflict with Moscow, and that the Kremlin would take appropriate decisions based on the resulting threats. It points out that another risk here is the fact that Ukraine using Western long-range weapons could fall within the scope of the revised version of Russia's nuclear doctrine, which states that an act of aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear state, but supported by a country that has nuclear weapons, is viewed as a joint attack on Russia.
Of course, this is what Joe Biden fears most, and he's trying to avoid exactly this kind of scenario, that Russia can escalate and perhaps use nuclear weapons or scale this up into a wider war with Europe. And he's been deterred, so he's only allowing this into the Kursk region, a very limited area. Okay. So what did they say on Russian state media, on TV? America will be no more. There will be no Biden, no Trump, threatened Russian state Duma deputy. This guy here. Okay. What did they say in other places? Other dictators were getting on the conversation. Venezuelan dictator Maduro calls Zelensky a Nazi criminal and criticizes the approval for strikes deep into Russia. The government of the US, France, and the UK, the axis of evil. Wait a minute. So he's calling the US, France, and the UK the axis of evil as opposed to Russia, North Korea, Iran? Okay. Have just approved the Nazi criminal Zelensky to use long-range missiles against our brotherly Russia. We are at a decisive moment. American imperialism has entered a phase of madness. Okay, so that's what he's saying. Now, Marjorie Taylor Greene was getting in on the act as well. On his way out of office, Joe Biden is dangerously trying to start World War III by authorizing Ukraine the use of U.S. long-range missiles into Russia. The American people gave a mandate on November 5th against these exact America Last decisions and do not want to fund or fight foreign wars. We want to fix our own problems. Enough of this. It must stop. So that's carried by RT, who's saying that Marjorie Taylor Greene criticizes Biden administration decision to permit Kyiv to use American long-range missiles against Trump, which Jay and Kyiv commented on, which was really interesting. Russia government media shilling for a U.S. Congresswoman shilling for the Russian government. Yeah, wrap that around your mind. Okay, so what's the solution? Now, this was in Euromaidan Press, this interview. I thought it was fascinating and helpful to our understanding. Biden helped Ukraine survive, but couldn't deliver victory. Trump's deal-making threatens quick capitulation. Ukraine's solution is to transform from aid recipient to business partner while building European military presence. Okay, let's look at the article itself. This is again in Euromaidan Press. And the interviewee is Oleana Getmanchuk, founder and director of the New Europe Center think tank. Getmanchuk analyzes how Ukraine should approach Trump's presidency and introduces an innovative concept of a coalition of the resolute, a new framework for European military involvement that could serve as a security guarantee amid an unpredictable Trump-Putin peace negotiation. And she references a song, Killing Me Softly, and that's kind of what the Biden administration has been doing all this time. The Biden administration helped us survive and will always be grateful for this. But we must also understand that the current administration's policy of as long as it takes has failed. Ukraine is still free is not a victorious strategy. She goes on to say U.S. support wasn't aimed at helping Ukraine regain its lost lands and recently also proved to be insufficient for the proper level of defense. This support was designed to help Ukraine avoid state collapse while simultaneously preventing the United States from becoming part of a direct confrontation with Russia. That's exactly right. That's all it was geared to do. It was a policy of measured support. There's a song, Killing Me Softly. Biden's policy was killing Ukraine softly, so to speak. Now, what's the great fear in Western capitals? Russia's collapse. Even more than freezing a war in Ukraine in a bad way, they're worried about what will happen if Russia collapses. And so that makes sense of why they're acting the way that they are. Decisions that could have been made long ago and could have helped Ukraine change the course of the war in Ukraine's favor still haven't been made. For instance, deep strikes with Western long-range weapons still have not been greenlighted, even now, after the presidential election. Well, this was written one day before Biden greenlighted it. But again, if you look at the fine print, what he greenlighted was a very, very small, very narrow band in Kursk. Now, Euromaidan Press asks, do you think that Trump's administration will take a braver position or a more restrained position on this? And she answers, I think there are also prospects for such approval under the Trump administration if, for example, there's a feeling that a decision like this one will make Putin more eager to negotiate. Today, when his offensive in Ukraine continues, it seems like he has no special interest or special motivation to go to such negotiations, he being Putin. So it's necessary to boost his appetite for negotiations by adopting strong and bold decisions, like letting them strike deep into Russia. Air defense capabilities are extremely important, but they are like painkillers. We need to target the sources of the pain. They're still not going to be able to do that, even after this is all said and done. When you have ability to strike into Kursk, that doesn't mean you're going to be hitting the sources of pain elsewhere. It's important to understand a message that nothing helps transform the Russia-Ukraine war into a global war more effectively than a policy aimed at demonstrative avoidance of escalation with Putin, respect for his red lines, slow response in decisions and actions which only vaccinate Russia, providing it time to adapt to new developments, and request help from China, North Korea, and Iran. And then they give this long list of Russia's red lines and where we are. We're right here. Every red line, it was violated, no escalation. Red line violated, no escalation. All the way through. There's a dozen of these. And that's where we are right now. All right, I've gone too long already. Darth Putin says we must be afraid that Russia will respond by doing what it's been doing for nearly 3 years. Like, what else are they going to do? If you have thoughts, put it in the comments below. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.